Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a turn-based RPG, quickly became one of the most talked about games of 2025. It received universal praise from both gamers and critics, sold over 5 million copies within its first 6 months, and even won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Most notably, Clair Obscur is the very first game made by Sandfall Interactive, a small studio from Montpellier, France. By the end of development, the core team counted about 30 people, and many of them had never worked on a video game before. Yet the final result looks and sounds like it was created by a seasoned studio of 100 developers at the top of their game. What's fascinating is that it all began with just one person, Guillaume, who one day decided to teach himself how to use Unreal Engine. When asked at the Golden Joystick Awards whether he was surprised by the game's very positive reception, he replied, "I think people don't really realize that now it's become big, but before the launch it was not supposed to be big." What started as a personal hobby slowly evolved into a full-scale production featuring motion capture, orchestral music, and cinematic storytelling. This is a story behind Clair Obscur Expedition 33. It all began in 2018, when Guillaume was working as a producer at Ubisoft. He was living in Sweden at the time, helping develop The Division 2. One night, he decided to open up Unreal Engine to get more familiar with the programming side of game development, since his background was mostly in production and marketing. One night, I just started Unreal Engine just to learn and have fun with it, and I got completely addicted, like to a point that was very toxic for my health. I was basically working 8 hours per night after my day job just because I couldn't let go. It was like, I can do everything. I'm a god in this world. While Guillaume was having the time of his life experimenting in Unreal Engine, he became good friends with a colleague named Guillaume, one of the gameplay programmers that worked on The Division 2. With Guillaume's newfound obsession, the two Ubisoft developers had plenty to talk about. At this point, Guillaume was still just exploring the engine's ins and outs, but he realized he needed a real project if he wanted to make meaningful progress. Being a big fan of JRPGs like Final Fantasy X and Lost Odyssey, Guillaume felt sad that those types of turn-based RPGs with realistic visuals had mostly disappeared. Final Fantasy shifted to real-time combat, while prominent series like Persona use a more cel-shaded anime aesthetic. Therefore, Guillaume decided to make a turn-based RPG with a realistic art style, something he himself would enjoy playing. After building a very rough combat prototype, he experienced a sudden realization, one that would become a defining pillar of Clair Obscur's gameplay. At the time, he was also playing Sekiro, a game built around precise dodges and parries. So when he tested his own turn-based system, a thought crossed his mind. Why can't I parry? This is boring. That single moment sparked the idea to blend traditional turn-based combat with real-time elements. From there, Guillaume began adding story elements as well, though the game looked nothing like the one we know today. His early concept was set in a steampunk Victorian-era England filled with zombies, aliens, and various other elements. As his vision expanded, the project grew from a hobby project into a full-fledged passion project that he desperately wanted to finish. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a team. Guillaume went straight to Tom, who was more than happy to join and use his programming expertise to elevate the gameplay system to the next level. Not long after, Tom was building the first prototypes featuring the turn-based system that blended real-time offense and defense. At this stage, the game was titled We Lost, and included early versions of Gustav, Lune, and Mael, characters that would later be reimagined for Clair Obscur. When Guillaume's work on The Division 2 wrapped up, he moved to Shanghai to work on a Heroes of Might and Magic mobile game. Meanwhile, Tom joined the Beyond Good and Evil 2 team. By 2019, Guillaume and Tom had made solid progress on We Lost, enough that they felt ready to take things a step further and bring more people onto the project. However, to do that, they needed funding. So Guillaume reached out to an old friend from university, François Maurice. Despite having no prior experience in game development, Guillaume asked if he'd be interested in handling the administrative side of the project and helping secure financial support. François didn't hesitate. He quit his job at Marcel, the French equivalent of Uber, and accepted Guillaume's proposal. In 2020, Guillaume decided to quit his job at Ubisoft as well and officially founded Sandfall Interactive with François in Montpellier, France. As chief of operations, François managed to attract a few angel investors that provided some early funding. It was far from enough to fund the entire project, but it allowed the studio to start hiring more developers. Guillaume began searching for an art director by browsing websites like ArtStation. Whenever he saw artwork he liked, he wrote down the artist's name. At the top of his list was was Nicholas Maxon Frankum. Like Francois, Nicholas had no prior game development experience. At the time, he was working as an illustrator for a company that organized circus events. But that didn't matter to Guillaume since he was genuinely impressed by Nicholas's work. With Nicholas sitting at the very top of his list, Guillaume had no expectations when he reached out to him. To his surprise, Nicholas immediately agreed to join the team. The next person to come aboard was Lorient Testard, who would go on to compose Clair Obscur soundtrack. Lorient grew up playing video games, but didn't show any interest in music until he was 16, when he found a guitar in his grandmother's house and decided to teach himself how to play. He eventually enrolled in music school, though mainly to refine his instrumental skills. Composing, on the other hand, was something he taught himself by listening to video game soundtracks and experimenting on his PC. That experimentation led him to create fan-made music for video game trailers he liked. He was making a living teaching guitar, but he wanted to connect with other video game fans. After composing around 50 original tracks, he posted them on a small indie game music forum. That's where Guillaume discovered Lorient's music. And once again, expecting another no, he reached out. However, just like Nicholas, Lorient didn't hesitate to join the project. Things were really starting to come together, and the developers began preparing a demo and trailer to show to potential investors and publishers. Guillaume posted a message on Reddit that stated the studio was looking for voice actors willing to record lines for free. These lines would be used in cutscenes for the demo. One of the people who responded was Jennifer Svietberien. Jennifer had studied economics and mathematics and enjoyed reading novels and writing as a personal hobby. After graduating, she worked in finance for a while, but eventually needed something more creative and exciting. She quit her job and began trying all sorts of different things. At one point, she participated in a 2-month project for NASA. She taught dance and trained in various martial arts, but she had never played a video game before, let alone worked on one before, until she saw Guillaume's Reddit post. It seemed like another fun challenge to try, so she submitted an audition. Guillaume liked what he heard and cast her for 2 roles. While recording lines for the demo, she offered to help write dialogue, since she was a native English speaker. Things naturally evolved from there, and when Guillaume saw how talented she was as a writer, he asked her to become the game's lead writer. By September 2020, Sandfall Interactive had grown to 6 core members. The demo and trailer were finished, but the team struggled to find additional investors and a publisher. We Lost just didn't seem to click, and everyone agreed that something was missing. They thought that maybe the setting didn't stand out enough. When they received some outside feedback, they knew what needed to be done. We spoke to some potential investors who said, you know, you can think bigger. Don't hold yourself back just because you're worried about funding. If you could do what you wanted to do, what would you write? So Guillaume called me and he's just like, alright, reboot. We're starting from scratch. Unconcerned with budget, the team began brainstorming a new, grander, and more unique vision for the project. While they initially struggled with this process, it was Guillaume's mother that set them on the right path. During one of his visits, Guillaume asked his mother what the worst thing was that could happen to her. She answered, to lose you or any of my children. Her response sparked a new creative direction for the project, which would soon be titled Clair Obscur Expedition 33. The developers wanted Clair Obscur to stand apart from the countless fantasy worlds inspired by British or medieval settings. They wanted something unmistakably French, something that would allow Guillaume and the other French team members to honor their own culture and history. The Belle Époque period was a natural fit to draw inspiration from. It offered a distinctive visual identity and carried strong artistic and cultural significance. For France, it marked a period of growth and creativity, so it makes sense that Belle Époque translates to beautiful era. Nicholas spent a long time refining the game's art style, aiming to build a world that feels both fantastical and historical. A place where grand theaters and ornate bridges coexist with impossible landscapes. Guillaume describes the final art direction as a blend of Art Deco and fantasy. The team was influenced by games like Dishonored and BioShock, but reimagined those influences through a more romantic, painterly lens. Nicholas's design process, in his own words, was simply to, quote-unquote, draw stuff I think is cool. He would begin designing each biome with only a few keywords in mind and let the visuals evolve from there. Meanwhile, Jennifer began writing the new story. She drew inspiration from the French novel La Horde du Contrevent, a fantasy tale about a group of explorers traveling across a harsh world. It captured the same sense of endurance and camaraderie that Jennifer and Guillaume wanted for Expedition 33, a story about people venturing into the unknown on a dangerous, purpose-driven adventure. When it came to defining the central conflict, the force that would propel both the characters and the player forward, the team struggled to land on the right idea. Jennifer and Guillaume explored many concepts but kept circling back to the image of a woman tied to a giant doomsday clock, partly because of early art references and partly due to their initial game concept, which had featured a semi-gothic adversary capable of wiping out large numbers of people with a single strike. In an interview with CGM, Jennifer recalled how that adversary came to be. This was back in 2020, in the midst of COVID, so the idea of an unrelenting force wiping away groups of people was somewhat top of mind. How do you mount a resistance when you feel helpless? When everything seems inevitable? When you don't understand the enemy you're fighting, or when the enemy seems impossible to fight? We spent quite a bit of time trying to fit the pieces into a compelling story. Who was this entity? What do they want? Why is everyone getting erased? But we kept hitting a wall. Nothing really captivated us. Around the time of the project's reboot, Jennifer had been working on a concept for her personal short story collection that involved an artist who could enter her own canvases. Suddenly, she realized how well the idea fit the game and how it could answer all the lingering questions about the antagonist. Guillaume loved it too, and that's how the woman with the giant doomsday clock evolved into the paintress. From there, Jennifer's work became less about outlining plot points and more about understanding the characters who inhabited this new world. She described writing Clair Obscur as a kind of real-life role-playing game. She would step into each character's mind, imagining how they would react in different situations, what they feared and what they longed for. In her view, good storytelling isn't about arranging events in the right order. It's about understanding why a character would make one choice over another. Those motivations would then shape the broader lore and plot points of the story. Very early on, Jennifer and Guillaume agreed on one crucial principle. The story should never tell players what is right or wrong. They didn't want there to be a clear villain or group of heroes. Instead, every major conflict is born from characters holding different perspectives on how to solve the same problem and protect the people they care about. Jennifer and Guillaume's goal was to raise questions and encourage players to engage with those questions, allowing them to be part of the decision making rather than being told what to think. The game's title is a direct reflection of that principle. Clair Obscur is a French term for chiaroscuro, an Italian artistic technique built on dramatic contrasts between light and dark. The technique depends on both elements working together to create meaning and emotional impact. There's no moral judgment attached. Light isn't good and shadow isn't evil. This mirrors the game's characters, none of whom are strictly good or evil. Each carries their own light and shadow, and like chiaroscuro, it's the blend of those contrast that makes them feel alive and believable. To make the world feel lived in, Jennifer wrote far more than what players ever see on screen. Lumière, the city at the heart of the game, has a fully documented history, past expeditions, political tensions, and decades of social upheaval. Every major character has roots that reach deep into that history. For example, Jennifer wrote 4 generations of family lineage for the character Gustave. Most of these details never appear directly in the game, but they shape how each character speaks, how they make decisions, and how they carry themselves throughout the story. While the story and art direction were beginning to take shape, the turn-based gameplay mechanics still needed more work. The biggest challenge was finding the right balance between the turn-based attacks and the real-time elements like dodging and parrying, especially the timing windows. Even though it was messy at first, it already felt like a fresh take on turn-based combat. The system rewarded skill without punishing players who preferred a more strategic approach. If someone excelled at timing their parries, they could take greater risks. If not, they could build their characters differently, relying more on items or defensive abilities. It was flexible, expressive, and unlike anything the small team had seen in a turn-based RPG. As the combat system evolved, the team began shaping each playable character around a unique gameplay mechanic. The goal wasn't just to give everyone different stats or elemental affinities, but to make each character feel different to play, almost as if their combat style reflected their unique relationship with the world. Fun fact, Gustave's mechanic, arguably the simplest one, was the last to be figured out. For a long time, he didn't have a unique mechanic at all. In the end, they settled on the idea of charging his mechanical arm to unleash powerful attacks. The team worried it might not offer enough depth long term, and even discussed adding overcharge effects to all of his skills. Ultimately though, they chose to keep it simple, especially since Gustave is the first character players unlock. Composer Lorien approached the music with a simple goal: to create something truly original, something as fantastical and evocative as the universe Nicolas had imagined. Despite growing up in France, he never set out to write a deliberately French soundtrack. Instead, he describes the influence of French music as something unconscious, a cultural imprint absorbed over decades that naturally emerged in his compositions. What mattered most was emotion, music that made the world feel alive, music worthy of the game's themes of light and shadow. Some tracks were created in a single day, while others took days, weeks, and even months. The centerpiece of the soundtrack, the 33-minute track Nos Vies en Lumière, was without a doubt the most challenging track to compose. Lorien spent 2 months on it, 10 hours a day, layering melodies and weaving in the musical themes of every major character. A key part of the game's entire soundtrack comes from the human voice. The human voice is like the most powerful and the most emotional instrument, so not having vocals, for me, is like losing emotion. So the voice was really important for the songs of Expedition 33 for the world. Alice Duport-Percier, the vocalist-composer of the game, really gave a voice to the world. She's become a part of the story, a part of the world. The vision for Clair Obscur was coming to life, but Guillaume and François were still struggling to find a suitable publisher. Their investor funding would run out sooner rather than later, and they urgently needed more money. Unfortunately, every publisher they approached declined. They did have a promising conversation with Alexis Garavarian, CEO of Kepler Interactive, but even he ultimately said no. After hiring 2 more employees, the team managed to create a vertical slice, which would later become the Yellow Harvest area in the full game. In March 2022, they brought this vertical slice to the Game Developers Conference, hoping it would finally convince a publisher. It worked. The same CEO from Kepler saw firsthand what Sandfall Interactive had accomplished with such limited resources. If the team could build something this polished on their own, Alexis could only imagine what they might achieve with a real budget. So Kepler agreed to become the publisher of Clair Obscur. Thanks to this new partnership, the developers moved into a new office with plenty of space for new developers to join the team. During the hiring process, Guillaume focused on one quality above all: passion. Experience didn't matter. What mattered was whether the person in front of him truly loved the craft. As a result, around 80% of the people hired were considered junior level. Some even came straight from school. By now, the combat system had made great progress, but it was still missing the stylish battle animations the game is known for. Guillaume had a very clear vision for how those animations should look, but he couldn't find anyone in Europe who could bring that vision to life. Then, one day, he stumbled across a YouTube channel that featured show reels from animators all over the world, and that discovery sent him down a rabbit hole. Many Korean animators had show reels showcasing exactly the kind of dynamic, expressive animation he was searching for. After a while, he compiled a list of more than 200 animators and reached out to every one of them. Kim Sung-yoon responded, and shortly after, he joined the team on a part-time basis. As development progressed, Sandfall needed more help in the animation department, so Kim invited several of his animator friends to join the project. In total, 8 animators worked on Clair Obscur part-time, since none of them wanted to give up their regular day jobs. Between 2023 and 2024, at the peak of development, the studio grew to around 50 developers. That includes the part-time animators, as well as 4 developers from App Software, the studio behind Scorn, who helped Sandfall with porting Clair Obscur to consoles. Near the very end of development, when the team shifted primarily to polishing, the studio had settled back down to about 30 developers. Of course, many people outside the studio also played a crucial role in bringing Clair Obscur to life. The talented English and French voice cast, including Jennifer English, Ben Starr, Charlie Cox, Adeline Chetaille, Féodor Atkin, Alexandre Gillet, and many others brought the necessary layers of emotion to each of their roles. Motion capture artists gave the performances physical nuance, while an outsourced QA team ensured the game was as bug-free and stable as possible. And behind the scenes, localization teams adapted the entire experience for players across many different countries. All of these contributions were vital, and none of them should be overlooked when talking about the final result. What began as a solo project in 2018 grew into a deeply collaborative effort, shaped by dozens of developers whose individual talents elevated one another. 7 years later, that shared effort took the gaming world by storm. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 released in April 2025 and received universal praise from both critics and gamers. Some call it a celebration of the RPG genre, others described it as a kind of masterpiece that only comes around once in a generation. For a while, it felt like everyone was talking about Sandfall's debut title. As of October 2025, the game has sold over 5 million copies. It's already won a bunch of awards at the Game Awards and Golden Joystick Awards, including Game of the Year, and it's sure to reap in many more in the coming months as the awards season continues. At the Golden Joystick Awards, Guillaume talked about the game's success and mentioned how no one saw it coming. I think people don't really realize that now it's become big, but before the launch, it was not supposed to be big. I think we all felt the same thing. It's going to be cool. It's not going to be big, it's going to be cool. And what's happening today is like nobody really understands what's happening. It's a weird feeling when you put your heart out into the world and the world embraces it and gives you so much love back. We get so much love from the players. It's so touching and incredible that it's very hard to explain. As for what's next for Sandfall Interactive, Jennifer mentioned shortly after the game's release that once the dust settles, the team will begin thinking about DLC. When asked which areas of the world she'd like to explore next, she explained that choosing just one is nearly impossible. It's hard to pinpoint one because I want to explore all of them. I love world building. I could do this all day. I could go in all directions, the past, the future, sideways, the adventures of SK and Francois. It could go in all sorts of different directions. In an interview with content creator Pirate Software, Guillaume explained that he considers himself incredibly lucky with how everything aligned during the creation of Clair Obscur, which makes it difficult for him to offer advice to aspiring indie developers. But if there was one piece of guidance he felt confident sharing, it was this. The most important thing when you start a game is knowing you don't have to make a game that you think people will like. You have to make a game that you will like. Before I end the video, I'd like to shout out my Patreon. For $1, you get access to all my videos completely ad-free, my Discord server, and sneak peeks of upcoming videos. It's no secret the channel hasn't been doing well this year, so it's uncertain right now whether I'll still be doing this next year. Views always go up and down, but if they stay down for a long time, Patreon could potentially ensure I don't have to worry about that. But I'm not there yet. So if you like the content and like to see more of it in the future, consider subscribing to the Patreon. As always, liking, commenting and sharing videos helps out a lot too, more than you might realize. Aside from actually watching videos all the way to the end, it's the best way to tell YouTube a video deserves to be seen by people who are not subscribed to the channel. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next year.